I want to do right now is, in a more succinct fashion, go through a abbreviated timeline as it relates to the myocarditis issue. Now, after facing 4 years of the Biden administration's efforts to undermine the public's access to information in my oversight work, I immediately issued a subpoena to HHS when I became chairman of this committee. The subpoena records I am releasing today, which are discussed in the interim report, do not contain FOIA redactions and will finally provide the public a more complete understanding of the Biden administration's awareness of the risks of myocarditis following COVID-19 injection. So now here's a brief timeline. On February 28, 2021, Israeli health officials notified CDC, quote, of large reports of myocarditis, particularly in young people following the administration of the Pfizer vaccine. Again, that's February 28, 2021, 2.5 months after the emergency use authorization. On April 12th, over a month later, a DoD consultant raises concerns to CDC and FDA officials about their ability to monitor and track cardiac-related adverse events. The consultant notes, quote, if you do not ask, you will not see it. But does that mean it does not exist, unquote. Around the same time, in mid-April 2021, CDC officials discussed safety signals for myocarditis, quote, for myocarditis with mRNA vaccines, based on DoD and Israeli data, but do not take immediate steps to warn the public. By the end of April 2021, just 4 months into the COVID injection, VAERS was already reporting 2,926 deaths worldwide within 30 days of injection, with 46% of those deaths occurring on days 0, 1, or 2 following injection. Now, I have the first chart I ever did on this, which I presented in our event in Milwaukee with the COVID injection injured. That chart, a couple months later, is showing, I think, 30-some%. I can't see it from that far away, but let me get out mine. That chart is showing, at that time, a couple months later, 4,812 deaths, 1,736, or 36% of those deaths occurring within the day of injection or within 1 or 2 days. Now, I was raising that issue. I was going on media. I was showing this chart, and I got censored. Radio talk show hosts, when I talked about this, they were deplatformed. Now, again, I realize VAERS doesn't prove causation. I realize it's grossly underreported, but that's a correlation that I thought was pretty important. Somebody ought to be looking at it. So when I finally had a meeting with Francis Collins, head of NIH, with a group of other senators, I asked him, are you watching VAERS? I gave him those stats. He did admit that 6 deaths were associated with the J&J vaccine, but for the other over a few thousand deaths, he said, Senator, people die. That was his callous reaction. That was the head of the NIH, completely blowing off the VAERS system that they had touted before they got the emergency use authorization. I'll continue. From May 17th to May 21, 2021, CDC officials discussed whether to issue a formal health warning called a Health Alert Network message on myocarditis, noting that, quote, providers aren't reporting these cases to VAERS. They knew they weren't. They knew they existed. They knew they weren't reporting them. A couple days later, during a May 24, 2021 vaccine safety meeting, notes show that FDA and CDC officials asked, quote, is VAERS signaling for myocarditis now? Question mark, and are told for the age groups 16 to 17 years and 18 to 24 years, yes. Yes, they saw a safety signal in VAERS, yet from May 25th to May 27th, CDC officials provide up-to-date information on the status of the Han to Pfizer and Moderna representatives. Not to the public, they're warning the injection manufacturers, indicating CDC's preference to keep those companies more informed about vaccine adverse events than the American people. On May 26th, then FDA Director, Acting Commissioner Janet Woodcock emails then CDC Director Rochelle Walensky noting that, quote, FDA does not concur with the issuance of the myocarditis Han as written. The same day, CDC and FDA decide to, quote, nix the Han and instead publish less formal clinical quote, clinical considerations about myocarditis on CDC website. 3 days following the myopericarditis signal, FDA official Peter Marks appears to raise concerns about even posting the less formal clinical considerations on CDC's website. He emails Woodcock and Walensky, quote, I need to ask for your patience with me. We still have concerns here if myocarditis and pericarditis have not actually signaled. That same day, CDC officials editing the clinical considerations discussed the need to, quote, walk back a sentence advising doctors to, quote, consider restricting patients with myocarditis from rigorous activity like competitive sports for at least 3 months until cleared by healthcare professionals. And I'll be talking to Dr. McCulloch about the danger of eliminating that warning because 4 days later, CDC posts on its website clinical considerations about myocarditis, which omits any advice to doctors to advise patients with myocarditis to limit rigorous activity. That's what's in this report in far greater detail. So I would ask that that information, together with my majority staff report, 2,473 pages of records HHS has produced pursuant to my January 28, 25 subpoena, and my actual subpoena. I want those entered into the record.